gay.
Yeah, because
I gotta go. If I don't go, I'm gone. My life's past midnight. I wanna go where there's breakfast and crosswords and see you tomorrows. There's a lot of co-op in this household. Yeah. Have you seen it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Uh,
All right.
I just wanted to say the word aviatrix because I think it's a really cool word.
Yeah. Hey everybody, you're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Billy Z.
And I'm Steve Mowry.
And we are your hairy heavy homos who talk about comic books. But again, you don't have to be a hairy heavy homo to listen in. And on this particular episode, we have an interview with Steve Bryant. Steve is best known as the writer-artist of Athena Voltaire. Steve, why don't you tell us what Athena Voltaire is about?
Well, she is a 1930s between the wars aviatrix who goes on amazing adventures around the world, fights Nazis, and finds magical artifacts with supernatural powers. In other words, is pretty awesome.
But Steve, the other Steve that we're talking about, is here to talk about his Kickstarter, which is called The Catch. And you're going to hear the interview right after we have one of our explosions. Then Steve, Mowry, and I will be back with you with our Woofs of the Week. We are thrilled to bring back to the show. It's been way too long. We are bringing back Steve Bryant. Steve is probably best known as the writer and artist of Athena Voltaire, the globe-trotting aviatrix who takes on Nazis, secret societies, zombies, and unspeakable occult creatures. If you haven't read that series, you're going to change your tone there, kids, there, because you're definitely going to be checking that out after this interview. And Steve has also been the writer for Ghoul Scouts, which was published by Action Lab. And he's here to talk about his new Kickstarter for a project called The Catch. Now, the elevator pitch for The Catch is Elmore Leonard meets Gotham Central and Powers. But I'm not going to go through the squib for that. I'm going to let the man himself pitch it to you. Steve, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And why don't you tell us, before we proceed into any other stuff, but there's a lot of stuff we want to talk to you about, why don't you tell us about the Catch Kickstarter? What's happening there?
It's a project I've had for a number of years, just kind of waiting to find an artist. I realized a number of years ago that I don't have enough time to write and draw everything that I want to do. So I try to find collaborators, and I can work as a writer and do some concept art or covers. I'm going to say a lot. I apologize. Variant covers or whatever like that. So I've had this idea kicking around for a while. It's really inspired by Elmore Leonard. The basic feel is, I don't know if you've read the book or seen the movie Out of Sight.
Mm-hmm.
Steven Soderbergh did it. It had George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez. It's in some ways it's kind of a cross between that and the other Elmore Leonard movie that was out at the time, Rum Punch, that Quentin Tarantino directed as Jackie Brown, because Jackie Brown has the bail bondsman, and Out of Sight is a federal marshal. So I was kind of playing around with those kinds of archetypes, and the mishmash between Leonard, either written or with shows like that or Justified, and wanted to know how bail bondsmen would work in the world of superheroes. You're not going to put Kang out on bail, but there's a hell of a lot of guys like the Hypno Hustler or whichever cheesy third-rate Spider-Man villain you're going to get. Hypno Hustler is always my go-to for that, but even somebody that like the Prowler or one of these guys that's really just a guy in a suit. and they're just stealing jewels. So what do you do with those guys? Well, I mean, if it's a first offense, they're going to post bail, and sometimes they're going to skip out on it, and you're going to have somebody that's going to chase them down. So it kind of started with that that kind of Gotham Central Powers kind of vibe, where it's a world of superheroes, and we don't really see a lot with, you know, Batman or Superman or Captain America or Spider-Man or anybody that handles the real powered ones. It's kind of just chasing down the lowlifes that are getting out of, you know, trying to get out of town. And so that was the initial premise. Did I ramble too long?
Not at all.
Feel like I feel like you'd already done the elevator pitch, so I'm kind of doing a slightly more deep dive about what inspired it. So I was fortunate enough that after he finished his run on the Athena Voltaire ongoing series, a Spanish artist named Ismael Canales was interested in collaborating with me again, and I showed him this pitch, and he was very excited by it. And I can't afford to bankroll him right now. I'm working and I'm in grad school and saving for a wedding, so it's just, you know, a little too many plates in the air. But in addition to partial ownership, I wanted to give Ismael a page rate, and that it's the same thing for colorist Roger Surroca. Both of them are getting a page rate, and they own the project. So it's not one of those things where a writer is, you know, tossing out a couple of bucks to an artist, but it's entirely owned by the writer. But you know, these guys still need to make a few bucks for their time. So that's where the idea for the Kickstarter came. Short story made long. That's
okay.
That's where we are.
The first thing I got to say is I thought Ishmael's work on Athena Voltaire and the Sorcerer Pope was fantastic.
He's really good.
He's really good. But I also have to say there were times I forgot that it wasn't you drawing.
But he's much better at staging action than I am. And that's not like false humility or anything. He's got a great eye for setting the scene. But thank you for the kind words. But yeah, he's freaking amazing.
And yeah, I didn't know if it was a case of him, you know, kind of adapting into the style that you had already set with Athena. So
I think it's awesome, and I'm a little hurt. But I'll get over it. But seriously though, like here's your connective tissue for that. One of Ishmael's favorite characters is the Rocketeer.
Mm-hmm.
So right there, you know, you've got kind of the Dave Stevens lineage between the both of us.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a good chunk of it. You know, we have similar roots.
Right. Now, how did you two hook up? Was it through Action Lab?
Yeah. Action Lab uses an agency to provide artists. And I've since become good friends with the guy that runs the agency, Lewis, and pretty much every artist I've collaborated with, I feel like, you know, we're in the same trenches making these comics, and you know, they're brothers in arms. So yeah, it's been a really cool experience. I was hesitant at first, but yeah, I'm delighted. He's become a good friend.
And I also have to say that through the preview pages, and this is just to backtrack a little bit, I do see a somewhat different style that he's employing with what we see in the preview pages of the Catch.
Yeah, I feel like he's adding a bit more rendering, and I'm sure some of it is probably also just having it. He's got a different colorist on it, so there's a different collaborator there, Roger Surroca, and Roger's doing a terrific job with it too. So I don't know if they're passing notes back and forth, so to speak, on how to handle it.
Yeah.
But I'm letting Ismael, since this one isn't my baby through Action Lab, this is, our baby, the three of us. So I'm letting him do whatever he wants, and he's steering the ship, and it just fantastic results.
Yeah, and colorists are very often the unsung heroes of a lot of projects, and the 6 pages that you've provided on the Kickstarter page, man, they just pop. An absolutely beautiful palette that he's employing.
And see, that's the cool thing, because I felt like Emily Elmer, who colored Athena and the Sorcerer Pope, did a great job. It's very period. Her palette was very appropriate for the period stuff. And I feel like Roger's stuff feels very contemporary. It's brightly, you've got a bright yellow car, and it feels like California, so to speak, the palette he chose. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I also have to ask you, because you have provided the concept of what the book is about, and that these bail bondsmen are not necessarily going after the Lex Luthors and the Doctor Dooms. They're basically going after villains that no one would ever make an action figure out of. So you've mentioned Phileas Frost, you mentioned the Grappler, you've mentioned the jumpsuited Agents of Harm on the Kickstarter. How much fun is it to create those characters?
It is a joy. I mean, my roots are in Bronze Age Marvel books, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I want to say this with full affection, because I don't want to piss on it, because these are the comics that I have the warmest memories of, right? Mm-hmm. But this is the period where Luke Cage hopped on a jet to collect on a debt from Doctor Doom. That's kind of a goofy ass idea.
Yeah.
This is the period when Galactus had a big G on his belt buckle. He doesn't speak English. That G for Galactus doesn't really translate. And again, I love those weird little fun quirks, these little shortcuts, these flaws in logic from work from the period where you're like, there's no way this would happen. But it's just this charm that we had when we're reading these books, and we're just rolling with it. So, the whole backstory on the bad guy that she's chasing in the cold open is, his name is Phileas Frost. He's a time traveler from the future, whose gear got trashed. I think did we say in a secret crisis?
Oh, no.
Okay, because we acknowledge a secret crisis later, but his time traveling gear got crashed. I mean, got trashed, and so he's stuck in our era, and he's just trying to get back to the future, and inexplicably, his gear, the only thing it can do is create ice-powered things, which is awfully coincidental for a guy named Phileas Frost. And so he's robbing banks to fund whatever it's going to take to repair his time travel gear. So there's that kind of dodgy logic that is done with a great deal of affection. Like, you just look at it and you roll with it, and you feel like you're embracing the conventions of this more innocent period. I don't know. Am I making sense with?
Oh no,
with
absolutely, absolutely. I was more a DC kid than a Marvel kid growing up, and I still have tremendous affection for these turkeys like Commander Blood, who was a villain in a Karate Kid for like an issue and a half. No, I absolutely understand the Bronze Age ridiculousness that permeated a lot of it. I absolutely can appreciate that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, even seminal books like New Teen Titans, you have a cult leader whose name is Baron Blood. Who is really going to sign on for a guy named Baron Blood? But we rolled with it.
Absolutely.
And it was a great storyline. So I just think there's something fun about embracing the charm of that. Mm-hmm. Did you read a book by Austin Grossman called Soon I Will Be Invincible?
No, I haven't.
It's just a terrific take on that kind of Silver and Bronze Age type of superheroes and villains. Mm-hmm. And again, the narrative throughout that book is very matter-of-factly when when you get people, just even normal Joes, randomly discussing, well, this guy says he's from a parallel dimension, and it's just accepted. And I think Busick and Ross did that a lot with Marvels, where you had the Phil, I can't remember his name, the photographer who's photographing Galactus, and when the FF banishes him, he's got this quiet moment with Gwen Stacy just looking up at like rain or something. And these people just looked at God and they're reveling in, being alive and what the world's like. So I just kind of love this quality that some of these other forms of fiction have brought to what you would get if you lived in a superhero world. And, not necessarily the gritty fascist type of vibe, but some of the hopeful elements. That's the Bronze Age stuff that I want to tap in. Good God, I rambled. I'm so sorry.
No problem. Something that really strikes out at me on the Kickstarter page is that you're going to have the digital copies of the Catch #1. There's going to be a Spanish version of that, which is something I really like to see because to Coppa Morrissey title, America is Not the World. And it's nice to see that there is an accommodation. I know with the geographic ambit where your other creative team members lie, was that on the table like right from the start that you were going to do a Spanish version?
No, I can't remember if it was Ismael or Roger that suggested it, but it seemed so bloody obvious. If we're doing at least digitally, it becomes a little more difficult if you're looking at it from a print point of view, but we can definitely do a digital copy that's entirely in Spanish. And I got really excited about that. It's, I don't want to go too far down the political rabbit hole, but the last couple of years have just been one of these. The last thing that I want to come off as is the woke, middle-aged, cishet white guy.
Yeah.
But there's something to be said for just looking around at everything and going, I have this little voice. I'm doing these comics. If I can have a bunch of kids of various different backgrounds fighting monsters, I want to do that. That's what we're doing with Ghoul Scouts. And Mark Stegbauer is drawing the third arc right now, UFOMG. And I think the world around us is further influencing how inclusive we want to be with that series. And yeah, I feel like it's one of these things with everything I'm doing. I want to try to just be a better citizen.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was Ismael and Roger's idea, and I'm kicking myself for not thinking of it, but I would love to do this, on a regular basis with books, just because why not? Why not try to open it all up to more people?
And the political edge aside, we have a friend, James Figueroa. He's based in Brazil, and he basically learned English because the publication histories in Brazil were so spotty for Marvel and DC Comics that he had access to the English originals, but the actual translations into Portuguese, there was just spotty publishing history. And he actually learned English mainly to read comics. And that's a step I don't think I could ever take, but it is nice to see when you do have multilingual versions of a book. It's just something that's, to me, that I just wish you saw that more and more.
No, I agree. Okay, so it's funny. I have to just digress because this is the coolest news story I've heard. When you mentioned learning English to read more comics, have you heard the I'm gonna butcher his last name, the Pete Buttigieg story?
Oh yeah, he's the South Bend, Indiana mayor that's running for president, and the story about him with the Norwegian translator.
Yes.
Yeah, that is amazing. That is absolutely amazing.
Everything I've heard about him, I've liked, and then I hear that, I'm like, intellectual curiosity? Sign me up, please. Yep. So yeah, but anyway, to kind of bring it around to you mentioning this about, bilingual comics, yeah, it's not something that ever occurred to me before, but it's something that's really exciting to me. My fiance is a grade school librarian, and, talking with her about all of the books on inclusivity and stuff like that has really broadened my horizons in terms of what you can do in a comic. And again, it just goes back to that being a good citizen thing,
Yeah. Okay, I have an interview baton. I've been kind of bogarting it a little too long. I'm going to hand it over to Steve. Steve, what have you got for Steve?
It's the old Steve show.
Steve and Steve.
Yeah.
Well, hey, so one of the things that you just kind of mentioned, and you were talking about, you referenced Marvels, and going back to the Catch, the idea that sort of the day-to-day lives and just the general life philosophy of people who live in a world with a bunch of superpowered humans, villains and, aliens attacking from outside and all of that. How are you going to be really presenting that kind of philosophy? Is it going to be a little bit more humorous? I know you mentioned sort of like the Bronze Age idea where you've got some kind of like ridiculous sort of things that are a little bit out there, but still kind of, fun to, in a comic book way, or you're going to look at it a little bit more seriously as in, okay, well, we've got some goofy villains here, but we've got some regular people that are dealing with these kind of goofy villains. How does that work, and how are they going to sort of look at their own lives in sort of the comic book? I mean, I might be kind of going like way out there, like world building and all that, but still, it's I'm curious about that because that sounds pretty cool.
Well, no, thank you. It is a cool bit, and so far in the first series, Lucy Chase, who's our lead, she works for the bail bondsman, kind of a romantic. I don't want to call it a romantic comedy, but I do like I think last time I was on, Bill, we talked about the screwball comedies of the 30s with the banter and stuff. So, there's that element too. So it's her and a U.S. Marshal, Jack Devlin. They're our leads, but Lucy is our primary lead, and throughout the course of the series, she encounters essentially our version of Batman and our version of Superman. So, you can imagine that a Batman-style character is not going to think highly of a bail bonds person because they're putting the criminals back on the street. But a Superman-style character is going to look at it as it's all part of the process. These men, whether or not they're guilty, they do deserve due process. And so, just some of those larger parts of it where it's kind of fun to just look at some of these superhero things. But then, the really big action will be acknowledged by the characters living in this world, but it's kind of off panel. Did you ever, okay, I don't know, did you ever watch Buffy?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. The episode, The Zeppo, where, Xander is, he's hanging out with all the undead high school jocks because he becomes the car guy. So he's driving them around, but everybody else in the cast is stopping, essentially the apocalypse in the background. And this is kind of like that episode of Buffy in a superhero universe. Maybe there might be, I hadn't thought of this, but yeah, maybe there needs to be a scene in one of the issues where, the skies are inexplicably red, or something, crazy like that, you never really address, but maybe there's a newspaper headline in the background that talks about, crisis averted. I haven't thought about that, until you mentioned it, but, kind of really steering into that curve could be really a fun way to also show the bigger universe. Did I answer the question, or did I go hell off?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I mean, it's just it's such a cool premise. I'm a huge fan of books. So when you mentioned Busiek, and my mind immediately goes to Astro City. And,
yes.
I love reading those types of stories that look beyond the superhero action. Don't get me wrong, I love my capes, but I also like seeing the perspectives of people who have to deal with living in that kind of environment. And this is definitely right up my alley. And actually, one of the other things that's also kind of right up my alley is a very cinematic feel to the books. And, one of the things that really struck me about Athena Voltaire is it really puts me in that cinematic world. Not necessarily, I mean, the setting, obviously, the 30s, that sort of, between the wars, exciting period that we really love watching the movies. But it also kind of put me in the mind of 80s, sort of those kind of like 80s epic films. Like Indiana Jones, or I know Rocketeer is kind of like early 90s, but sort of that same kind of thing where there's it's a look back. It's a very, very time period, but it also allows for that greater action that we didn't actually get in some of those movies in the 30s and 40s, where it was kind of implied, or they just didn't have the budget, or didn't know how to make it done, or how to get it done. But it sounds like when you were talking about The Catch that you're looking more in that sort of, 90s period where there were a couple movies that were like that. You mentioned Jackie Brown out, and what was the other one with J-Lo?
Out of Sight.
Out of Sight. Yeah, I mean those kinds of great sort of action crime based films, but there's also a lot of personality, and it sounds like you're trying to really bring that out. You were talking about the relationship between the bail bondsman and the U.S. Marshal. Could you talk a little bit more about that? How that's going to excuse me as I knock things off my desk.
No problem.
Could you explain sort of more how that's going to develop? Are you going to sort of go along that same line as sort of kind of keep that cinematic feel with it, along with the action and the superhero element?
Yeah, and by the way, I hope it doesn't come off as too much of a cipher if I keep referring to movies and TV shows and books and comics when I do points of reference. But I'm a big pop culture junkie, and sometimes I feel like movies and TV are easier touchstones for a broader audience than books. So I'm not trying to be anti-intellectual when I say, hey, this episode of Justified or whatever. So hopefully, it doesn't come off too much like just a hodgepodge of the sources. But yeah, like their relationships between the two lead characters. I think I mentioned Lucy Chase and Jack Devlin. Jack's the marshal. He's kind of her Guy Friday, and he'll help her unofficially on a bounty from time to time. He works for the Marshal Service under a special powers type of branch. So, he deals with your metahumans or your mutants or whatever universe you're picking from, your capes. So he specializes in that, and that's kind of Lucy's specialty gig too, because not many bonds people are going to bond these guys, and not many bounty hunters are going to go after them unless they have powers. So yeah, their relationship is, I love banter in characters, but I also sometimes for the longest time, as I've learned to be more of a writer, especially when I'm not drawing, not thinking from a visual point of view and looking at flaws and some of these aspects. And on these characters from the ground up, I wanted to build them as kind of a mess, both of them. So like Lucy comes from a family of, and we're going to meet her family as we go along, of law enforcement people. Her mom's a marshal. Surprisingly, she's Jack's boss. Her mom's a marshal, and her dad's a retired PI. He's divorced from the mom. Lucy's brother is an assistant district attorney, and he's everything her parents wanted her to be. Lucy graduated from Quantico, but she's rebellious and headstrong. And over the course of the book, we're going to learn. Should I spoil some of the backstory, or should I leave it?
As much as you want to, since it's your baby.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're going to learn the reasons why she's not really in law enforcement, and she's essentially doing this job that a lot of people look at as kind of undermining law enforcement. So yeah, she's got a difficult relationship with her mom. She's divorced. She's seeing Jack on and off, and Jack is separated from his wife. He's estranged from her, and he's kind of a mess too. He's always kind of coasted by on natural ability and charm. And that's the reason why his relationship isn't good, because he's not good at doing the work. And so, yeah, he and Lucy are going to be kind of a challenge for one another. And so that's the basic core thing I'm going for there. And I mentioned Justified earlier. I don't know if either of you guys watched it.
I haven't, but
I haven't either,
I
no.
know of it. Yeah.
Okay. Like Timothy Oliphant's character, Raylan, who's our lead, is kind of a himbo in some ways. He makes bad choices. He's not, he's got the leading man looks, but he's kind of a fuck up in some way, like not at his job, but at relationships. He has bad judgment, and that's kind of endearing for, any of your lead characters, to make them not always think things through. So, I hadn't really approached, like the core of characters when I would go from perspective and how the character kind of starting with flaws was a different approach, and it was really rewarding in this way. So that's kind of the vibe that I'm going for with their relationship, is playing with their flaws and just trying to learn how to find some truth in our humanity. God, that sounds pretentious. It's not intended to be that kind of thing, but when you're writing these characters, you're also just trying to think about not truth with a capital T, but with a lowercase, where you're just trying to find something that's going to make it feasible or real or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking for the depth. You're bringing the depth of these characters and fleshing them out, and kind of to go away from that a little bit, but with your collaboration here with Ismael and Roger, I mean, it sounds like and of course from the preview pages too, and also in the video, I really like the sort of behind the scenes that Roger has in his section, where we're actually seeing how the coloring process takes place.
He's a madman.
Yeah, hopefully he doesn't actually work that fast, because no. I'm thinking that's been sped up, but it's amazing. It's beautiful, the detailing that he can do, and of course the artwork is amazing. I really enjoyed Ismael on the Sorcerer Pope. I think that was great. So when it comes to the action scenes, how do you three collaborate with that? Do you provide sort of a general outline of what you want to see happen? Or does Ismael sort of, let you know, it's like, hey, I want to see something like this. And then, with Roger, just sort of how that's going to be expressed with the color?
Okay. I'm not trying to name drop, but, the very first time I illustrated a professional comic script, when I was first working on samples, a friend of mine knew Mark Schultz, who writes and draws Xenozoic Tales for the independent book, and he was writing a bunch of DC and Dark Horse stuff for a while, and my friend put me in touch with him, and I contacted Mark about getting one of his scripts, and he sent it to me, and he said, I don't put in a lot of detail when I'm writing for other people, because I only want to put in what's necessary for the scene so they can play to their strengths and they can make it their own. And so that was the very first professional comic script I had read. So that was kind of on my mind every time I write. And I've gotten to the point now where I really, if you get a script from somebody that breaks down every element of a fight scene, even when it's really cinematic, you lose some of your ability to, I shouldn't say you, I lose some of my ability to really have any fluidity in it, because sometimes it becomes all about hitting a punch list of everything you want it to be. And so, keeping in line with what Mark shared about his scripts, I've gotten to the point now where if there's an action or a fight sequence, I'll say how it starts, and then I'll say the script literally says as many panels as you want, blank and blank fighting. And then maybe it'll say second to last panel, such and such happens, last panel on, last page of the fight, this happens. And then, so pretty much, at the beginning of it, they're in their cars. And by the end of it, one guy is standing over the other guy with a gun. It's up to you, however you want to tell it, to get us there. And I do that with Ghoul Scouts too, with Mark. And it feels like nobody feels like their hands are tied because they're given this, they can stage the sequence however they want, and they can, do a bunch of tiny Paul Galassi panels, or they can do everything really Brian Hitch widescreen, or a mix and match, or they could even, do some Eisner style stuff where, you're playing with what's going on out of the panels and stuff like that. And I really like to write that way, just because you're going to get the best out of the artist. So pretty much any point when there's an action sequence, I'll just pretty much hand the wheel over and say, okay, go to town, whatever you need. By the end of this, Jack needs to shoot the wheel off of the frozen steampunk carriage. Go.
That's pretty cool. That seems like a really great way to collaborate, because it gives them so much freedom, or gives an artist so much freedom to really kind of put their stamp on it as much as the writer, in sort of creating the whole feel of a scene. That's really cool.
It's really fun. I've come to really enjoy it. And I mean, if somebody doesn't like it, I just want them to tell me. But, similarly in terms of playing with the form, I've got another script that I was talking with a friend of mine, a local guy, Sean Thornton, that we're collaborating on. And, I said, well, do you want me to write a full script? Do you want to do it Marvel style? And he's like, I don't know. And I said, well, here's something I've always thought might be interesting. I don't know if you'd like to try it this way. If I wrote panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, panel 4, all the way up through like panel 120, and you knew it had to be 32 pages, and you got to break, the page breaks and all that kind of stuff. So we're trying that because he thought that seemed like a fun way to work.
Cool.
Yeah. So
yeah, no,
it's pretty much just kind of seeing how your collaborator wants to work and trying it that way. And I would love to do a book Marvel style with just a basic plot and script it afterwards, which, I mean, I kind of do that with the action sequences. When I turn it over, I'm like, oh, I'm going to add a dialogue balloon here or whatever. Mm. It's kind of handy because I letter it too. So it's like, letterer Steve is going to put that in.
I'm going to add these words over here. And yeah.
Then the artist curses me. No.
You ruined. I wanted that big expanse, just plain white. No, that's pretty neat. I've always been fascinated with that sort of what goes into making that soup, especially because different creators and different teams have very different ways of working. But no, that's a lot of good info. Bill, did you have any questions about that, or?
Not necessarily along those lines, but I would like to ask Steve a couple of questions regarding some of his other projects that are very easy to obtain from Action Lab Entertainment, it seems, these days. We've mentioned it a couple times, but not in any detail. So why don't you tell us about Ghoul Scouts?
It's kids versus monsters. It's an all-ages love letter to movies like The Goonies or the Monster Squad. So it's a group of 5 kids, 3 boys, 2 girls, living in the paranormal capital of the world, Full Moon Hollow. And they're, it's kind of similar to like Sunnydale on Buffy or Crystal Cove on Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. it's one of those centers for weird paranormal stuff, and the kids are trying to uncover the mystery of their town.
What were some of the challenges? I don't know if challenges is necessarily the right way to characterize this, but what was the difference in adapting a writing style for an all ages book? I'm just wondering about that. If there even was one.
There wasn't a big difference. It's another book that took a number of years to actually, come to fruition. Because I initially had the idea when my son started in Cub Scouts in second grade. He'll be graduating high school in a couple of months. So, sometimes it takes a long time. But yeah, I always kind of wrote it back then with him in mind. He's a smart kid. I didn't read any kids comics when I was growing up. I was reading Marvel and DC books, and just kind of looking at that and looking at stuff like the Pixar movies or whatever, where you could put some other layers in, but yeah, you don't have to write down for kids. If you look at any kids cartoon, they have deep mythologies now, and the kids are much better at tracking, and categorizing every Pokemon or every bad guy that, whatever hero fights. And I mean, I remember that when my brain wasn't filled with, balancing my checkbook and paying certain bills, how easily I could remember, who drew what issue of the Defenders and, all of that kind of stuff. So kids are surprisingly good at being able to keep track of that. So you don't really need to dumb it down. There's no cursing and there's no blood, but otherwise it's just like any other comic, I think. And, there are layered things in there for adults. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
And another question I have is, I wish I had reached out to you when this book had come out. How did Athena Voltaire Pulp Tales come about? And first of all, it's worth saying to people that this was a prose-based anthology on Athena Voltaire.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it briefly because when we were still at Ape Entertainment, Brent Irwin suggested it as, because at the time I was writing and drawing and I was really slow. And so he suggested it as a stopgap. And like everything I do, it seems, it exploded. I mentioned it on an episode of Comic Geek Speak. And you remember, when the CGS forums were really active.
Yeah.
Do you know Chris Murrin? I feel like I'm.
Yeah, I know he's your editor for a number of projects. Yeah, I know the name, and naturally the mutuals are many. So.
Right. Well, it's funny. I feel like I mentioned Chris in every interview, but yeah, he's integral to the process. But this was the book that he first reached out to me about because he heard me mention the prose book, and he said I would really like to edit that. And I said that would be great because I've never edited, anything. And the process took much longer because we eventually were leaving Ape and we went to Dark Horse in their sequential pulp imprint. And when we were at Dark Horse, we weren't sure if they were going to, give a thumbs up to doing the prose book. And then our the guy that was in charge of sequential pulp he learned he had cancer, and it was really quick. And so then we weren't at Dark Horse anymore because our imprint went away. And then we went to Action Lab. So there were all these delays in getting the book out. And I'm not trying to trivialize a death with, mentioning it. Hey, it slowed down this book. It's just part of the story. I hope that doesn't sound insensitive. But yeah, we were delayed again. There's no such thing as a short story with me. And we were delayed again. And when we went to Action Lab, they were on board for doing the prose book. So by this time, though, it's been fermenting for 6 years or whatever. So as I meet people, as Chris meets people, we're set up at San Diego Comic-Con, and people come by and say hi, and we tell them about the book, and we keep getting more friends that we're inviting into the book. And so, yeah, I think it had like 17 stories. But part of the fun of it was catching, quote unquote new writers before, their star had fully formed. So yeah, we got, Karina Becko, and Gabriel Hardman, on a story, and Tom King. And yeah, it was pretty fun. So all those delays added up to that.
It's really interesting that you have a long gestation period like you had with this. I imagine some of those names weren't as big at the time that they hopped on board. So you had maybe a rhinestone that turned into a little bit more of a diamond by the time the book came out.
Yeah. It was kind of cool to see success, happen for these people. So yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a neat experience and kind of a chance to say, I knew them when.
Yeah. And I do have to say, as somebody who is looking right now at one shelf of comic book based prose books, most of them are pretty damn good when you do read a story with even the reader is flexing different muscles, sometimes with very familiar characters, just a more adaptive way of looking at a character. And I think there are things you find out about a character that's a little better suited for the typed word than the sequential art way. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, it just from this perspective, having other writers contribute to this character, does provide, some more insight into how I can tackle the character as well. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Okay, well, Steve, we wish you the best of luck with the catch.
Thank you.
At the time that we're talking about this, you're about at 54%, and there's always big drives at the end. So let's hope by the next time we talk that you remember when we talked about that successful Kickstarter for the catch #1. I'm sure that's going to happen. You are going to be at C2E2?
Yes. I think it's Artist Alley G6.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I will be there with Athena Voltaire and Ghoul Scouts, and probably some preview material for the catch.
Okay. And do you have any other personal appearances coming up?
I will be at SpringCon in Minneapolis, St. Paul in May, and San Diego Comic-Con in July.
Okay, and if people want to reach out to you over the interwebs, where would they go?
Twitter at Steve Bryant Art, SteveBryantArt@gmail.com, and SteveBryantComics.com.
All right, Steve. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been way too long, and I'm also, as I'm speaking to you, I'm looking at my framed Vandal Savage that Steve that I commissioned from
I remember
Steve a
that
few years ago. Yeah, and as I said in the past, if you ever pitch to DC, man, you got to incorporate that guy in there.
You're too kind. Thank you.
Works. Again, we wish you the best of luck with the catch, and hopefully it won't be another 3-4 years before you're on again.
Anytime. I always feel weird contacting friends about having me on, just because it seems like shameless self-promotion. But obviously I like to talk, so
that works. Okay, thanks again, man. And we're back and wrapping up. Sorry, folks, this was a bit of a short episode, and we wrap up every episode of the Comic Book Bears podcast with a segment we call the Woofs of the Week segment. In the bear community, if you find a gentleman attractive, you say woof, so we just adapt that to our recommendations. Steve, I'm going to have you go first. What is your Woof of the Week?
Well, if you're a longtime listener, you know that I watch way too much TV, so of course, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about a wonderful show that is back for a second season. It came out about 2 years ago in the UK, and I think just last year in the US on Amazon Prime, and that's the series Fleabag with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And Fleabag itself, it's hard to describe. It's very fourth wall breaking. Phoebe's character spends a lot of time talking or looking at the camera pointedly while going about her life, which is an absolute disastrous mess. And it's funny, it's wonderful, it's got some amazing actors in it. Olivia
Colman.
Olivia Colman, who's just coming off of her Oscar win, is in the new season. She was also in the first season. And Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who, if you aren't familiar with her, she was the voice of L337 from the unfortunately less popular Star Wars Solo movie. But she's also a producer on Killing Eve, if you were familiar with that series from last year, and also season 2. It is available right now on BBC in the UK, but it is coming very soon to Amazon Prime. So hopefully everyone will keep an eye out for it, because season 2 is just as crazy and hilarious and heartbreaking as the first season.
I have to say I'm a bit more familiar with Waller-Bridge from Crashing.
Oh, yeah, and Crashing, too. She was fantastic in that.
Yeah, that
so awkward and wonderful.
Okay, well, my Wolf of the Week goes to a comic book, and this was a comic book that has a very interesting history, and the book I'm talking about is the very awkwardly titled Man and Superman 100-page Super Spectacular #1. Let's just call it Man and Superman, okay? This is a story that was written by Marv Wolfman, which was originally scheduled to be released around 2008-2009, when DC was publishing a book called Superman Confidential. They had also had Batman Confidential. A precursor to that would have been Legends of the Dark Knight and Legends of the DC Universe, where they have these standalone stories which may not necessarily be part of continuity, but talk about earlier periods of the characters that we know and love. Basically focuses on stories about the earlier parts of their life. And this book is not much of a Superman book. It's very much a Clark Kent book, where we see Clark basically come to Metropolis for the first time. He's finished with college, he's finished with his excursions around the world, and he tries to become a reporter and has his eyes firmly set on becoming a reporter for the Daily Planet. Again, in the DC Universe, the Daily Planet is held up as high as institutions like the Washington Post and the New York Times. So how does this rookie get this job? We find out within this story. It's really, really well crafted. Again, we're talking about a period that's 10 years ago for our character. And what's really nice about this story is if it wants to be part of continuity, there's nothing that provides a problem with that. But if you want to just have it as a standalone story, it works fine too. And this is also one of the absolute best depictions of Lois Lane you will ever, ever, ever read. It is at a slightly higher price point, which was the equivalent of 4 issues. So the 4 issues at $250 a piece, maybe not so bad. There are plans, because the book has sold well enough, that they are going to put a traditional trade out of the book later in this year, if you did miss out on this particular issue. Art on the book is really well done by Claudio Castellini, and again, written by Marv Wolfman. So if you can still find it, I definitely recommend you buy it. And if not, then hang on for the trade that's eventually going to come out. Again, Man and Superman 100-page Super Spectacular #1 from DC Comics.
Now, Bill, why was do you know the reason why it took about 10 years for that to come out?
It was originally scheduled for Superman Confidential. Superman Confidential was actually canceled, so it didn't have a home. And you're talking 2009, which is only, at this point, a year and a half away from New 52, which, if you read about New 52, they basically were brewing that around 2008 was when that really kind of started, at least internally.
To start putting through, like, the ideas in Flashpoint, and then, of course, the whole Flashpoint event.
So basically, it didn't have a home, even though this was a completed story. Both story and art were completed. And, again, there's been this very welcome refocus on Marv Wolfman, especially from the digital standpoint, with how well the digital versions of New Teen Titans are doing in the wake of the series. he has some clout. DC was able to find a format where they could finally release this, and it's a very welcome addition to the Superman canon. There have been one or two interviews where Marv Wolfman, trying not to sound egotistical, said he really believes this is the best Superman story he's ever written, and after reading this, I don't disagree.
Wow. Well, that's cool.
It's really good. Do you have it?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Was it? Do you know when it was actually released?
The actual release date was February 6th, so
Okay.
about a month and a half ago.
So pretty recent.
Yeah, so when you see a trade solicit, I suggest you think about it.
Cool.
Okay, that's our episode. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. And if you want to listen to us, you can do so by downloading us through iTunes, listening to us through Stitcher Radio, or from some of the other podcatching platforms. We'll be back real soon. We got to talk Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't forget that.
We got to do that fairly soon. So we'll be back with you probably in a few days. Take care, everyone.
Whoa! Look at me, Cinderella. Stroke of midnight, footman gone. My glass slippers, now they're Merrill's. And Prince Charming, he's just run. Spell is broken, unenchanted. Sheets are soiled. Linens she picked up at Bloomy's for a marriage that I spoiled. I gotta go, I gotta go. I gotta hail a pumpkin coach. Ah! So I gotta go. If I don't go, I'm gone. My life's past midnight. I gotta go. Where there's breakfasts and crosswords and see you tomorrows. After the night, I gotta go. I gotta go. The world is a question. This room is an answer, and the answer is no.